is intended to be for informational purposes only. The information does not constitute legal advice. The law is constantly changing. The information may not be complete or correct, depending on the date and your particular legal problem. Each legal problem depends on its individual facts, and different jurisdictions have different laws and regulations. Because of these differences, you should not act or rely on any information in this segment without seeking the advice of a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction for your particular problem. And Marshall Chriswell is one of those, and he joins us in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to have you with us here again today. I want to enter this topic, and this is a field for which I'm not prepared to discuss much at all, but I know that you will be. And that is parental rights, termination of parental rights in today's day and age with the drug culture the way that it is and the way drugs are just tearing apart families up and down. This has become a really big issue these days, has it not?
It has, absolutely. We have situations all over the state and here in Indiana County where parents, for one reason or another, and a lot of times you're right, it is drugs, are unable or unwilling to perform basic parental duties for their children. And what that leads to in many cases is the actual severing, the termination of those parental rights, and concurrently with that, and adoption of those children.
So frame it for us a little bit. First of all, who is it who is seeking the termination of parental rights in the majority of cases?
So it's different in many cases. So a lot of these. So when we're talking about termination of parental rights, a lot of times it is a petition that's brought to the court by an agency such as Indiana County Children and Youth Services or whatever the comparable agency is in the county that you're dealing with, and it's a situation where that agency, through the power vested by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, has taken legal custody of the child or children and placed them with maybe a foster family, and after a period of time, the parent has demonstrated, the parent or both parents have demonstrated that they are not capable of or not willing to provide those essential basic parental duties for whatever reason, and it proceeds to a termination of parental rights proceeding in state court.
And this is obviously a very thorny issue within families and difficult to separate all of the different parties that are interested. Take me into the idea of family members beyond the immediate family, beyond the parents, and do grandparents, aunts and uncles, do they get involved?
Absolutely. And in these cases where we're seeing CYS agency involvement, there's a legal requirement that the agency look to kinship care first, that they look to family members and see if there is an appropriate family member who's willing to take on the responsibility of that child, either for a temporary foster situation or maybe eventually a permanent placement in the form of adoption. Now, aside from these agency proceedings where you have CYS or comparable agency involved, there are also, and particularly with the drug problems that we're having, there are lots and lots of more informal adoptions going on that are outside of a state agency. So you have maybe mom and dad are having issues, drug related or otherwise, and they will voluntarily relinquish parental rights to a parent, child's grandparent or an aunt or uncle or other family member or friend, and even sometimes in those cases you have those folks, grandparents, aunts, uncles, petitioning the court for involuntary terminations of parental rights for the parents because they've maybe just disappeared or are unable to provide those parental duties.
It is difficult to imagine there being anything more emotional in terms of a court case than something such as this.
Absolutely.
And I know the Indiana County courts bend over backwards to make sure that the child is best cared for. All through the process, it can be so terribly, terribly difficult on the children involved, let alone the adults involved.
Right.
You as an attorney get right into the middle of that situation, and I know it has to take a toll on you folks as well. But talk, if you would, about how a case would progress from that moment when it first comes to you, representing either the parents who are trying to hold on to their children, or somebody who is saying that maybe it's best that we take over.
Yeah, and I've been on both sides of that, and a lot of times it's in that more informal situation where you don't have a government agency there directing the process. You have something that's a little more, frankly, sometimes even a little chaotic. Someone comes to me, and let's just say it's a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle who's been caring for a child for a period of time, and they say, okay, what can we do here? Because it looks like mom and dad are really not capable of handling being a parent. So what we do is we always explore first, can this be a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights? And talking to, they talk to the parents, and sometimes the parents have their own attorneys. A lot of times they don't. I'll speak with the parents, and we'll see, okay, is there a way that we can work this out by agreement? If we're all in recognition that you're not in a place to be caring for a child, would you agree to an actual termination of parental rights? And with these cases, sometimes it can be helped along a little bit because there's a law in Pennsylvania for post-adoption contact. So, normally and traditionally, a termination of parental rights was a 100% severing of that parental bond, the parent-child relationship, and you had no more rights to custody or to get information about what's going on with the child, see report cards or school pictures or anything like that. Now there is a law providing for post-adoption contact. So sometimes that can really help ease the conflict there, and not have to go forward with a full court proceeding to determine whether parental rights should be terminated. You can say, okay, if you would agree to this, then the grandparent or aunt or uncle or friend or whoever is going to take over as parent, they're going to agree that you can have some contact or receive some information about the child moving forward. And sometimes that's enough to get an agreement.
You and I have not visited this topic specifically in the past, but we have visited the topic of the child's wishes, and that plays into the child's age. The child's age plays into that, actually.
That's right.
And so if it's an older child, early teens, even late teens, it's a different thing than if the child is, say, under 10 years of age.
That's right. And if in Pennsylvania, if your child's over 12, they actually generally are going to need to consent to an adoption in a lot of private adoption situations. Now, you'll see some situations where a child is in foster care or otherwise, and they're not, the child doesn't really want to be adopted, and so that termination and adoption doesn't play out, but they still stay in foster care. Yeah.
So difficult, and with the youngest of children out there, that's where the child's welfare is something of primary consideration, but in that case, when they are completely helpless, that has to be a part of that whole discussion too.
It is, and you're always looking to the child's best interest first. Just like we've talked numerous times about just child custody cases, and where you have mom and dad that are trying to get custody determinations made. It is always the child's best interest that is first and foremost.
All right, so somebody who is in this situation has been notified that there is an action filed or an action being contemplated in which their rights as a parent would be terminated, or they're on the other side of that equation. what should they be thinking about, and how should they then approach next steps?
Well, speaking with an attorney is got to be one of your first steps there. And if you're in a process where you have, like I said, a state agency like CYS directing the process, and you're facing a termination of parental rights, you generally are going to be afforded a defense by the court. But you do have the right, and that would be free of charge. You do have the right to hire a private attorney if you so choose. Most of the time, private attorneys are involved in those, as I said, the vast majority of those cases, which are private adoptions and terminations of parental rights. So you definitely want to get an attorney involved from the beginning. And like I said, we can really sometimes short circuit the process if it looks like, okay, it's a pretty clear case, but we need to come to an agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are talking and probably assuming that this is a case of a child being transferred from one household to another to the care of another, and generally within their own local area, but then it's complicated by maybe somebody who lives in another school district or in another county, or even somebody who has moved to another state but is a very, very close family member. And all of those have to be taken into consideration. It just seems like there are so many different things that have to be handled as this process goes through that would make it extremely complicated.
It can be, and those jurisdictional issues that you mentioned can make things very complicated. Absolutely. As you always talk about, different jurisdictions have different laws, and it's so true. And you have to determine where does jurisdiction lie for this case, and can it be brought here in Indiana County or in a Pennsylvania court, or if a child's lived for an extended period of time in another state, does it have to be brought there?
And there's another term that is used quite often, that is standing. Do I have standing in this case that I can actually become involved in the court case?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And if a lot of these cases start out as private custody cases. You have a grandparent, aunt, uncle, friend who has taken on some responsibility for this child. But you're right, there's a question of when does, in those situations, when do you cross the line of just kind of helping out? Okay, and maybe the child stays at your house on the weekends, or you help out in different ways. But when do you cross that line to actually have standing to say, okay, this child should be with me primarily, and eventually, maybe even moving towards an adoption situation? And that's a legal determination that, really an attorney has to advise you on.
Wow, so many different issues involved here. He's Marshall Chriswell. Somebody wants to discuss this with you, and they should, with an attorney. What need they to do?
Give me a call at 724-465-5826. Stop by and see us in the Atrium Building here in downtown Indiana, or go online to westernpalawyer.com.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thanks.
It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS AM 1160 and 101.1 FM.